In this video, we're going to talk about committing to the look. See, the cycle of cinematography is kind of a funny one because before, when we shot on film, we had no choice but to sort of bake in the look. Each film stock has its own color rendition. So before there was color grading, we had no choice but to just lean into the look that was already given to us. Of course, we could alter the colors with stuff like printer lights, etc., how we developed it, push and pull process. But then digital came along, and we were able to ingest this film footage into the computer and then manipulate those colors in post. And this gave us so much control. Of course, there was always that little underlying color that came from the stock that you used, and this was still an important part of cinematography. But then moving into the digital era, we have full control now. We can basically make anything look however we want to make it look. But with that control and those options comes a lot of choice. And now we're no longer in a box. We no longer have these parameters pushed around us that force us to do certain things. And I think sometimes that's not a good thing. You'll see that some awesome things, some awesome creations are done when there is a box or a challenge. It's that challenge that creates more creativity. This is why lenses are such a big deal in our space. Since all cameras are effectively the same right now, we use lenses to try to force a look into our image. How can we further add character to an image before it gets to the computer? And then of course there is the color grade. Once it does get ingested, now we're able to color the footage and alter it to however we want. But what I've found is that even though we can do whatever we want, we don't. I feel like most people now just use like a film emulation color grade and then move on. Or if you look at the movie industry and the really high-end commercial space, most people are using the colorists over at Company 3 to color their footage. And if you scroll down through their webpage, you'll start to see a pattern. Everything sort of looks the same. Obviously, they're shot on different cameras and lenses, different production design, but there's something about the quality of the color that kind of looks the same. Some stand out over others, but I long for a time when directors and DPs had to fully commit to a look and a vibe. So for a while now, I've wanted to try to recreate the look of the famous horror film, The Ring. And that's kind of where this experiment for today comes in. That's not right. That doesn't look like The Ring at all. What if I... Yeah, that's better. Just had to bake it in. This was an idea I've always had, but I never really took the time to do a deep dive on how they got their look. Honestly, I just assumed it was a digital color grade until I saw this video come up on YouTube by the username Watching the Aerial. This creator actually tracked down the info on what they did. Turns out the look was almost completely baked in. It was completely done in camera. So once they exposed the film, there wasn't any real room to go back. They couldn't change it later, they committed to a look, and they stuck with it.
Images on the tape are leading us somewhere. She's showing you the horses. You saw it. Show me. Did you see it in your head? She shows me things.
Alright, we just need to stop for just a second and do a short ad for the sponsor of this video, which is Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to present your work online. You can start with one of their best-in-class templates, or using Squarespace's next-generation web design system, Fluid Engine, you can customize every detail with the reimagined drag-and-drop technology for desktop or mobile. Or maybe you want to start an online store to sell your photography or other products. Squarespace has all the built-in functionality to get one of those up and running quickly, and I've actually been using Squarespace to run my online stores for almost a decade now. And of course, if you're like me, you're probably looking to build a portfolio, which Squarespace has a ton of features for that very thing. You can even create private galleries for client work using these tools. So if you're looking for a home for your work, well, you can just do that with Squarespace. Click the link in the description to get 10% off, and I want to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Okay, so back. So first, definitely go check out their video if you want to. I'll have it linked below and see how they fully did it using film and shot back in the early 2000s. But I'm not going to do that exact same thing for this test because I'm shooting digitally, I'm not even shooting on film. And with that comes some different ways of making this look. And he talks about that in the video, but I'm gonna kind of just use his principles to do these tests today. See, what watching the aerial found is that if you're using a digital sensor and you try to recreate the look of the ring, you can't use the same filter combination that they used on film in order to get the same look. Because first off, they're using like a very specific film stock, and we're just not doing that when we're shooting on digital. So the thing that they figured out, and the easiest way to do this, was to use a CTS gel in front of the lens. CTS gel meaning color temperature straw. It's basically a orange gel or a yellow gel that's supposed to offset your color temperature down from daylight down to like 2900 Kelvin, 2600 Kelvin, something like that. And it's adding a little bit more yellow than something like a CTB filter that would just change it from daylight to tungsten. Now they don't make an actual Tiffen filter for that. They do have some versions of it, which they actually, I think, maybe used a similar version of that on the film stock, but it's hard to get now. But because I am shooting digital and I can manipulate some stuff in post, I figured I could do this just by using the CTB B85 filter, which is going to take that color temperature from 5500 Kelvin, 5600 Kelvin down to around 3200, 3400. And then what I'm doing is I'm putting this filter in front of my red Komodo, and then I'm setting my white balance to 2000 Kelvin with a little bit of green added in. I found that this gave me a pretty good look right out of camera. It gave me this very blue, green, teal look, very similar to the ring. It was really hard to get it to match the ring perfectly just because of that film stock. But then this is what I found is if I go into DaVinci Resolve, I can actually use a film stock emulation, and I can use a specific one that kind of gives me more of a yellow-green look. And it kind of helps with the magentas because in the ring there was a lot of magenta in the skin. And I'm not trying to directly copy the ring, I'm just trying to get close, kind of find a look that's interesting to me and bake it in. So by using this filter in front of the lens and baking in, I don't get to go back. I cannot go back to 5600 Kelvin. If I push it past like 3200 Kelvin, everything is completely orange. It looks like Blade Runner 2049. Now, of course, I could probably pull down the orange in post or something like that, but it would never be as accurate as not having the filter. And that's what's fun about the filter. You would think it would just change the color temperature.
You would think it would just change the color temperature. You would think it would just change the color temperature.
Okie dokie dealio. I'm an idiot. Yeah, so it turns out just changing the color temperature can do the same thing as the filter, which makes sense, right? It's only designed to change the color temperature of film stock, which I just assumed putting glass in front of the lens would change more than that. And it does. I mean, if you do put the filter on, the Tiffen 85B filter on, you do lose like a stop and a half of light or so, and you do add more green to the image. But when shooting on the red Komodo, a RAW camera, I just was like, wait a second, just do the math here. All we're doing is offsetting the color temperature by 1200 degrees and then adding some green. The first time I tested this, I saw a major difference between the filter and the actual image, but I think that's probably because the image was darker when I was doing those tests when I put on the filter. And then based on what Watching the Aerial said in their video, I think I just assumed that the filter was going to do more. And when I originally tested it with the CTS filter, the gel, it was really having an effect. Here I am editing this video, testing it in the computer, and I was like, wait a second, let me just throw up these side-by-sides, which are direct side-by-sides. It's literally like this shot, but with the filter on and the filter off. And I was like, can I even get it there? And I couldn't get it there at first. But then I realized if I'm manipulating the raw footage, I can get it there. But if you're using basic controls in DaVinci Resolve, it's a little bit more challenging, so keep that in mind. I still think that this whole ethos applies, especially if you're shooting on like a mirrorless camera, a 10-bit camera, and not shooting raw, then you definitely have more of that ability to bake it in. Because if you put this filter on, basically you're moving your entire, it's almost like a sliding dynamic range. You're sliding your Kelvin down in a way that forces you to have to shoot cooler. I'm only offsetting the color temperature by 1200 degrees if you think about it, because if it's taking my 5600 Kelvin down to 3200 Kelvin, and I'm just taking it to 2000, well, that's only 1400 degrees, right? So 1200 to 1400, it just depends on how I was shooting, but most of the time I'm just offsetting it by like 1400 Kelvin and then adding a bunch of green on top of a film LUT. But in like the Red Komodo, I can simply push that red raw green tint all the way to like 13 or 14, and I get the exact same image as putting on the filter and then up in the exposure basically. So I guess I was wrong. The idea still applies. Put yourself in a box. Put filtration on your lens, bake in a look. Try to get your look to the sensor, don't do it in post. Just because I proved that you could do this version in post does not mean that you shouldn't still use a filter. If you're using a mirrorless camera, you use the filter in front of it, you're double baking things in because the image is already baked in. And DaVinci Resolve in a 10-bit image is not gonna give you as much as my Red Komodo did. So if you're shooting red raw, maybe it's not as big of a deal. Obviously a diffusion filter and a vintage lens per se will still give you a lot of character, and I still think that we should think in this direction. But as far as getting the look of the ring, you're never gonna be able to get the look of the ring without really manipulating your color or shooting on the exact same film stock, processing it how they did, and using all the filter stack that they did. In hindsight, doing it in the modern era, it really isn't that hard. But what I like about the filter still, and I still think is worth noting, is that the filter is giving you this look quicker to the sensor. It's less back-end work. A parameter's already set for you, so you don't go messing around later. Now, once you know what the filter's doing, you can undo it basically. And as I was doing that talking head, I was like, you can't undo it. But then I figured out if I just went to 3200 Kelvin on the camera, I did undo it. But now I just don't have the ability to manipulate it the other direction too far. So the principle still applies a little bit. And all this just goes to show you, experimenting is fun, it's good. It makes you understand things more. And also, don't trust everything on YouTube. I'm not saying that watching the aerial was wrong by any means, because I don't think they were, but it is good to test these things yourself and see what kind of results you will get from it. The reality is we don't know what they did. American Cinematographer had an article, they talked about how they shot the ring. We don't know how they really processed it at the end. We don't know what they did. To me, I still can't figure out how they got their skin tones to be so magenta while keeping the background green. That is something that still hasn't really revealed itself with any of my testing using filtration and so on and so forth. I think it's the film stock. Maybe there was something else going on in post that I don't know about. Maybe they did throw it in the computer. Maybe they did push the skin tones into pink to make them feel more alive in certain scenarios. I know that they said in watching the Aerials video that they removed one of the green filters when doing this. Something still to consider. I don't need a green filter. I just push the green on the red raw. There's your green filter, right? What's fun about the Tiffen filter is it did darken everything and it added that vibe kind of immediately, but now I know I could just build a LUT and do that. So I'm a little embarrassed, but you know, we live, we learn, and we try new things, and I have to say that the vibe of this video was really fun, and it put me in a headspace of shooting a certain way, and I was able to accomplish that across the board, because that intentionality goes further than just the filter, right? We're also talking about the entirety of the ring is like is low-key lighting. There's always cloudy skies. The highlights are always down to like, I don't know, 60 IRE. Everything is very low, and by shooting with this LUT and this color and that intention, I did that across the board with all of my test footage. It's that mindset that we're talking about here. It's getting into that mindset and trying to expose everything and shooting everything in a way that creates an outcome that you're looking for rather than just throwing it in later and figuring it out. Force it in. I do this all the time now. Like, I always have a LUT side card on my footage so the client can use that if I don't get to color grade it, and I always expose a certain way that forces the look, and I still agree that that is something that you should consider if you don't have the option to do the stuff in post yourself. Yeah, I don't even know if I'm going to continue the rest of the video. I think you get the point. And I still think it was a really interesting experiment. Okay, yeah. Until the next one, guys, I'll see you later.